Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Ken Shinizuka. I'm the president of the Oxford Psychedelic Society. I'm going to be moderating today's debate. Before we start off, I just first wanted to thank both of the speakers for taking the time out of their busy schedules to come to this debate, and also for various members of the OPS committee for helping out with setting up today's event, including Seth for getting this set up, and also Sam, the academic officer, who helped come up with some of the questions for today's debate. I'd just like to mention that OPS is not in the business of trying to make any money from our events. We do need to just break even in order to continue running them. And the best way to support us is by buying our merch, which will be available for sale after the event ends. Talk to Scarlett, who will be managing that. Great. So the motion of today's debate is a drug policy informed by the latest scientific research would end the UN's current policy of outlawing the production and supply of narcotic drugs. I'll read that just a second time. A drug policy informed by the latest scientific research would end the UN's current policy of outlawing the production and supply of narcotic drugs. So the structure of the debate is going to be as follows. There's going to be a free portion of the debate followed by a moderated portion of the debate. So for the free portion of the debate, we'll have 5 minutes of opening statements from each side, 5 minutes of crossfire, 5 minutes of rebuttal, and then 5 minutes of second crossfire and second rebuttal. Then we'll move on to the moderated questions from me. Then we'll move on to questions from the audience. And then finally, each speaker will give 5 minutes of closing statements. I'd also just like to introduce the speakers. Crispin, who is debating in favor of the motion, sitting on my left, has been a member of Parliament for Reigate since 1997. As a member of the Conservative Party, he has served as chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and as the Parliament Undersecretary of State for Prisons and Youth Justice. Since 2011, he's also been the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Drug Policy Reform. The group was founded on the belief that the global war on drugs has failed and has caused severe public health and societal harms, not least in the UK, where drug-related deaths are the highest on record. The UK's current approach to drug policy is not working to reduce drug use, drug-related crime, or drug-related deaths and harms. Mr. Blunt then went on to found the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group in 2019, which seeks to help with creating evidence-based drug policy. Peter Hitchens, who is debating against the motion, is a renowned journalist, author, and broadcaster who has previously reported from Moscow and Washington for the Daily Express and has also contributed to other publications such as Prospect and The Guardian. He is currently a columnist for The Mail on Sunday. He's written 12 books, including in 2012, The War We Never Fought, The British Establishment's Surrender to Drugs. According to The Guardian, Hitchens argues in his book that it is nonsense to say the war on drugs has failed when in fact we have never even tried to wage it. Drug taking was in effect decriminalized by the Misuse of Drugs Act of 1971, ever since when the authorities have deployed the rhetoric of toughness to conceal the truth that we are free to take drugs with impunity, knowing our crime will probably be ignored or at worst not punished but treated. The solution to the alleged failure of the war is not to give up and give in, but to start fighting it. And without further ado, we'll start with opening statement from Mr. Blunt.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and debate this issue here, and another opportunity to share a panel with Peter. This is not the first time that we've discussed this, so it's actually quite difficult to find people to speak against the motion that is in favour of more intelligent drug policy. And what we ought to do is to go back to the UN Convention itself, and how did we get to a place where in 1961 the United States led the world to prohibit all narcotics with the exception of tobacco and alcohol. And it arose out of a decreasingly employed part of the FBI, whose responsibility had been alcohol, and when the Americans, having had the catastrophe of prohibition of alcohol, then brought that to an end by changing their constitution back in 1933, so that alcohol could then be a legal and regulated industry. There was then this part of the FBI, led by a man called Henry Anslinger, who then created a demand in order for drugs then to be prohibited, and the debate and the manner in which the world was then led on this journey had almost nothing to do with the evidence of harm, had it done, and had the Americans thought that alcohol is a drug, and quite a dangerous drug like that, and they had had this catastrophic evidence of what happens when you prohibit it. And we know the headlines that this industry was given to organised crime. That because it's actually quite difficult to smuggle beer in large quantities from Canada, people smuggled whiskey. So the strength of the drug people were taking then rose. And if they couldn't obtain it themselves, they would distill their own industrial spirits, thus killing themselves in large quantity with the dangerous drug that they were now determined to get hold of. And amidst all this carnage, you then got a business that had been gifted a vast amount of money by the state. And it's then finding its policemen, its politicians, its judges are starting to be bought by the scale of the money that is now in the hands of an industry that had been made illegal. With all these lessons, the Americans then, with all the difficulty of making a constitutional amendment in the United States, the Americans then reversed this position. And then, led by the nose, the Americans, as part of the American institution that had an interest in policing drugs. I commend the books that have educated me in this area, Drug Wars, by an ex-drugstore operator in the UK called Neil Woods, and Johan Harry's book, Chasing the Spree, give a very good account of how we arrived in this position. And in 1961, the UN agreed that, to the proposition that drugs are bad, they're banned. And that came into law in a formal sense in both the United States and the United Kingdom about 10 years later. And we had in the 1960s in the United Kingdom the British system for dealing with people who were addicted to drugs. And in those days, if you had a heroin habit, you could go to your doctor and you could get a prescription. And after 1971, when we passed the Misuse of Drugs Act, that stopped. And we went from about 1,000 registered heroin addicts in the UK and probably about 10,000 heroin users in society. In the course of the next 20 years, we went to 350,000 heroin users. And the effect of prohibition was to turn every drug user then into the marketing department of the criminal supply chain, the supply chain that was now only in the hands of the criminals. And if you had a heroin habit, you couldn't go to your doctor, so what do? You find 4 or 5 people to shoot up in order to fund your usage. What do? They find 4 or 5 people to shoot up. And we had created the most motivated period sales force in history. And hence this fantastic expansion of the number of heroin users. And at the bottom of that pyramid are all the people who are too screwed up to be able to find 4 or 5 people to shoot up with. So what do? They steal. And that is half today of acquisitive crime in the United Kingdom is created by funding that demand for drugs, which is then supplied criminally. Now that's why I opened in 5 minutes, and I hope that single example gives you the clearest view as to why we have made a terrible mistake globally and why we now need to consider policy change right across the world.
Thank you. Mr. Hitchens.
Thanks. First thing I want to contest is Mr. Blunt's little joke, beginning with the struggle to find anyone to oppose the intelligent approach to the drug. Yeah, well, no need to apologise. I think both sides are intelligent. It really is a question of what sort of society you wish to live in. And do you wish to live in a society in which huge amounts of human misery are created and indeed are exploited for profit by wicked and cynical people, or do you want to live in a society where, to some extent at least, we're protected against these things? I'm not going to go into a long disquisition challenging Crispin's account of the history of attempts to prevent the spread of drugs. I would differ from him. I say much of what happened originated in Egypt in the 1920s and the efforts made by the Egyptian government at that time to persuade the legal nations, as it then was, to move towards international bans, particularly on marijuana, but on other drugs as well. The answering of the story is very popular with certain people that is writing as the whole truth. What I would like to do, though, is to quote from a description of Egypt at that time by Malcolm Muggeridge, who used to be famous, who was a major journalist in this country, and was a teacher in Egypt in the 1920s when this problem was going on. And he said, "When I hear or read the apologies of modern advocates for hashish, as marijuana was then called, I recall the Zafran Palace in Cairo and the stupefied faces and inert minds of so many of the students there, the dreadful instances of the destructive effect of this drug on bodies and minds which any resident of the Middle East was bound to encounter. I know of no better exemplification of the death wish at the heart of our way of life than this determination to bring about the legalization of hashish so that it may ravage the West as it has the Middle and Far East." I quote that because it's first-hand and it's true. And we have a problem with drugs, and people may like to take them, but they do grave damage to them, and they don't just do grave damage to those who take them. Drug abuse is not a victimless crime. The families of people who abuse drugs are terribly, powerfully hurt. And I recommend any of you who have any doubt about that to read the account by my good friend Patrick Coburn, the great foreign correspondent of The Independent, whose son, Henry, was introduced to marijuana at his Canterbury Grammar School at the age of 11 and became, following this, seriously and irreversibly mentally ill, and now lives, I'm afraid, courtesy of very heavy doses of antipsychotics, and will for the rest of his life, and who I knew before this tragedy overcame. And what Patrick said to me, amongst other things about this, was how many people, when he had the courage to go public about what had happened to Henry, how many of his friends and colleagues and acquaintances came to him and said, "This has happened to me," or "It's happened to somebody close to me." It's horribly common, and it's devastating when it happens, and I think we should do something to try and protect people against it, particularly against the enormous power of peer pressure, which is placed upon the young in schools to take drugs, and which often leads them into the most disastrous consequences. So that's fundamentally what drives me, is the desire to save people from personal tragedy, but also to fight against what must be one of the greediest and most cynical lobbies ever to take place in human existence. And people object to fast food chains and soft drink companies and tobacco, and big tobacco and big pharmaceutical companies, with some reason. It's the extraordinary thing in the modern world is that the popular approval among people who eat vegan and organic and are very sensitive about the world and the planet and the atmosphere, people of that kind willingly support what I refer to as big dope, a fantastically powerful and rich greed lobby which seeks to legalize a substance which will damage most of the people who take it, but which will bring enormous profits to those who manufacture and distribute it. This is what lies behind this campaign, which is rapidly approaching success. There are many, many other aspects of this. I mentioned one small point of this. If you want to argue about United States alcohol prohibition, by all means do so. But bear one thing in mind. Unlike the supposed drug prohibition now, which is not enforced, it made no attempt whatsoever to prohibit the possession of the drug alcohol by anybody. It was purely the manufacture and supply of it which was supposedly prohibited by an extraordinarily small enforcement force in a country with vast, unpoliceable seacoasts, enormous, unpoliceable interior spaces, and gigantic, unpoliceable borders with neighbouring countries which did not have alcohol prohibition. So whether it failed or succeeded doesn't seem to me to have very much bearing on the problem which we face. I'll leave it at that for the moment. I can return to the details of many of these things during questions and rebuttals and exchanges, but that's my fundamental case.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchens. We'll now move on to the first crossfire. Mr. Blunt will ask the first question.
Peter, the truth about it is that we are largely in agreement in terms of what the objective is, which is to reduce the harm to society from drugs. And the evidence is that the simple approach of a global ban, of global prohibition of narcotics, might satisfy the moral certainties for the politicians who then legislate from a moral high mountain. Drugs are bad, they are bad. But if they took the care and to look down into the valleys where the consequences of that policy are being meted out, what we'll see is carnage. And many of the damages that drugs do are made infinitely worse.
Forgive me, but is there a question coming?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Are made infinitely worse by the effect of prohibition and putting the drug consumers on the sides of the criminal supply chain.
And the question is?
Do you agree?
No. First of all, let's be careful with the use of the word prohibition. I'm going to ask for a show. How many people in this room have taken an illegal drug? Please raise your hands. Now, if we had prohibition, first of all, they wouldn't do that because they'd be afraid of being prosecuted, and secondly, they wouldn't have done the stupid thing they were all just admitted to having done. So your argument falls from the start on basic practical knowledge. There is no such thing as prohibition. There has not been anything remotely described as prohibition in this country since the latest, the 1990s, and probably earlier than that, it's built. So can we stop using this claim that there is prohibition of drug abuse in this country? It doesn't exist. It is a fantasy of people who have a wholly different objective in mind. It's perfectly, if you want to take illegal, dangerous drugs in this country, I'm afraid to say that you can. I regret this, I don't advocate it, but it is undoubtedly true. So the argument really that is going on is actually about legalisation. Legalisation isn't about whether or not we prosecute or make trouble for individual drug users. The cause which Mr. Blunt served, whether he intends to or not, is the cause of legalisation, which means legalisation of sale and advertising. And that is the next step which is being pushed forward by the billionaire big lobby. This is what they see in the Proposition 64 in California, which carried a few years ago as an example of this, and contains, amongst other things, elaborate provisions for the advertising of the substance. So having spent, in my lifetime, something like 50 years finally forcing big tobacco into a corner, preventing it from advertising and telling us you cannot make money out of human misery like this, we now propose to introduce another drug which will create massive human misery and allow the makers of it to advertise it and spread it throughout our society. That is what this argument is really about. The argument about whether or not people can take it has, alas, been resolved, as you've all just proved. The argument about whether it can be advertised and promoted and forced into the homes of many more people has not been resolved, and that is the thing that I'm actually most worried about. So no, I don't agree with you at all. So we don't share an objective.
So you think I'm promoting the advertising and promotion of things that are currently illegal?
I think the effects of what you do lead to that.
Well, I think that is that it has to. That's where they're under a serious misapprehension. There are probably three models of drug supply. There is the criminal free market, where it is what you have represented here. Drugs are illegal, but everyone can get them. And but no one knows exactly what they're buying because there's no trading standards, there's no exercise authority over the supply chain. So people have not the first idea what they're then putting into their system if they choose to consume. There would then be the alternative free market system where you could go and buy one make you like and test it. Well, I don't think anyone would be suggesting that's a terribly wise way to go. There is a middle way where the supply of narcotics that people, if they're desperate to consume, they will be able to consume it, is then controlled and licensed by the state. And that is done in the case of alcohol. Alcohol is licensed and regulation. And it has produced a very sizable industry of which people are incredibly proud. They are brewers or associated in the wine industry or distillers producing particular products when people know exactly what they're buying and it's being marketed to them. And under 18s have been made quite difficult for them to sell. And so to set up the suggestion that there is a simple dichotomy of choice, it's not. We can get to a much better place as a society where we can address the harms that drugs do in a way if we regulate and license them according to the harms that they present to society. And we can then educate them, so that to enfranchise them to make the choices about things they know what they're buying, as to whether or not hold them responsible for their conduct if they are then under the influence of those drugs, as we do with drinking and driving, for example. And what I want to do is to get away from the worst possible place, which is simple blanket prohibition and handing this big industry into the hands of the criminal supply.
So will you tell us, do you have any current models of your supposed middle way? What do you think about California?
There are all the states who have gone down the legalisation route around cannabis, all offering different models as to how you would license.
Do you think this is good?
I think it's better than prohibition.
But on the basis of your argument,
I think it's much better.
I think it may be my turn. I think on the basis of your argument, it is a flop, because the idea that you can regulate and control the nature of the product sold is completely undermined by the fact that alongside the new legal market, the old illegal market continues to flourish. So in California, for instance, only 25% of marijuana sold is from legitimate sources. The rest of it is coming illegally. And the illegal trade has continued to flourish, just as I have to say it does in illegally distilled alcohol and illegally smuggled cigarettes in this country, even though they're legal. And the other thing is, being legal doesn't make it safe. And the cigarettes are legal, regulated, but they're not safe. And nor would marijuana be. And this is something we will have to come on to. I don't know how much you care or how much you know, but the correlation between marijuana use and lifelong incurable mental illness is very strong. And people such as Professor Sir Robin Murray, one of the country's most distinguished psychiatrists, operating in a part of the country where marijuana use is very heavy, have no serious doubt that this correlation is more than meaningful. And you have to address this. You actually are proposing the relaxation of attempts to limit the sale and consumption of a drug which does permanent, irreversible damage to the minds of those who take it. What sort of person is in favour of that? And that was a question, actually. Are you what sort of person?
Yeah, of course I am. Okay. Of course I'm not in favour of that. Precisely for the reason that in the United Kingdom, where cannabis remains illegal, the supply chain is in the hands of organised crime, and the cannabis that is available here, 95% of it is skunk. It is very, very strong in THC. It is the most dangerous cannabis for developing young minds. And if you actually had a legal market where you control and have a clear messaging about who can buy this stuff, you would say to people under 24, whilst their minds, their brains are still growing, the risks they are running, and you could regulate in order to require a much lower strength product to be sold to particular age groups. And along with tobacco, after a long battle in which you have played a undistinguished part of raising people's awareness of the dangers, tobacco consumption has properly tanked because the risk-reward ratio of people using it is plainly in absolutely the wrong place, and people have made their own decisions, and they've been encouraged in doing so by the taxation policies and public health policies that the government have been able to follow. And that is the model which we should follow for cannabis and the other drugs, where the access to those drugs is regulated and licensed by the state. And then you would not get particularly young men who are vulnerable to schizophrenia, have those vulnerabilities exploited by them consuming skunk on the streets of the United Kingdom.
If cigarettes, no, very quickly, if cigarettes, we knew what they did, if cigarettes are being introduced into our society now, would you favour prohibiting their sale and manufacture and distribution, or would you go for the Crispin approach of saying that we'll still do public education, but we'll let them take root?
No, I would favour controlling it.
You'd say what?
I would favour controlling it. But not regulating, because you control it through licensing and regulation. And through licensing, regulation and taxation, you can then get the public health measures across that this new product, if that's what it was, has within it the most addictive compound of all, nicotine. And if you are daft enough to consume it by combusting it inside your lungs, you'll then get a water together combusting it inside your lungs with all the damage that combustion does to your health. It's not a very difficult argument.
Do you not grow taxation is what leads to illegal distribution?
I'll say this is the same process. We'll start with a follow from Mr. Block.
You see, I do think that where Peter is profoundly wrong is that prohibition works. Prohibition makes things worse, and it's the social consequences. And for me, my experience as prisons minister is what brought me to this debate. I was the prisoner of Daily Carroll between 2010 and 2012, and the course of 77 prison visits in that time saw the impact of the prohibition of drugs on our society. And perhaps the saddest thing I've seen is that Cuba may see cleaning up to get their methadone replacement treatment stuck under their tongue to make sure that they can get back onto the wind in order to trade it. And the almost impossibility of keeping prisons free of drugs. Why? Because this is a vast cash industry, and the temptation, and with a £20 billion a year industry largely in cash, of prison officers and police officers and others being corrupted by the temptations on offer are almost impossible to stop. And so you couldn't even protect the people in prison who wanted to be protected from drugs, who were on rehabilitation programs in prison. Experimenting with drug-free wings in order to try and enable the prisoners themselves to police the access of drugs into their lives, with all the incentives they had then of trying to get clean. And that's when saw the effects as to when prisoners are then released back into society. And as people have said, in prison, if you arrive without a drug habit, you're quite likely to acquire one whilst you're there. And when people go back out into society, and we shove 45 quid of cash in their hand, and who is the first person many of them are likely to go to see? Go to their dealer. And for many of those who were opiate users, if they found that opiates had changed their strength since they went inside and then got stronger, the chance of an overdose was extremely high. And nobody cared. Just disposal of a problem. And it is the problem for drug users, as Peter said, for them and their families is huge. And there is a much, much better way of controlling access to drugs and helping people manage their own drug consumption, to alert them to the dangers, is to actually have the state license and regulate this business. And where that will be done in terms of a cannabis, which Peter is pointing to, if we're daft enough to regulate in a way as they have done in Colorado, which is seen as a relative success, but the legislators get greedy and put a level of taxation on the legal market that keeps the criminal market in business, don't be surprised if you can't put the crooks out of business. But the secret of getting control of this is in the exchange that I had with Anna Soubry in the House of Commons. I sat down in the tube and she said, the drug dealer's friend, she said. I said, no, I'm going to put them out of business. And if we can put them out of business, we're going to be in a much healthier and much better place with all the social consequences that flow behind the drug trade.
On and on we go about this alleged prohibition. Yes, what you call prohibition and what I call sensible law enforcement works. In two major, free, democratic, law-governed countries in the world, this problem of heavy drug use. Yeah, let's get rid of it, sure.
This
problem of heavy drug is actually trouble, because we need to continue to prosecute possession. We have a ridiculous arrangement in the laws of this country where we go on and on about evil dealers and the terrible traffickers and the cartels in distant parts of the world who worry about the same warships to try and interdict. But we do nothing about the people who actually buy and take the drugs involved. Now, why are drugs illegal? They're illegal because they're harmful, but it's the people who take them out of society. So, if you make a law against them which then selectively punishes the traffickers and the dealers, but treats the users as if they are in some way victims or ill, then you will feel you're impossible. If you were to stamp out of business, you don't close the shop that sells the thing that people want to buy. You persuade them not to buy it. And you persuade them not to buy it in this case, as we used to do in this country, up till about 1973, by punishing quite severely the actual possession of marijuana and other drugs. We don't do this. We stopped doing this in 1973. The Conservative or Chancellor or Hitchens told magistrates to stop sending people to prison for marijuana possession. And although the maximum sentence for marijuana possession remains 5 years imprisonment and unlimited fine, this is simply not imposed. And the police have since then given up enforcing it. So that has now in Japan, in South Korea. And I'm not talking here about the Southeast Asian countries which have a death penalty for drugs. I'm talking about serious non-government countries with proper police forces. These countries, Japan and South Korea, they prosecute possession of marijuana, and I will say as a result, but I will say it's a remarkable correlation, it's used a lot less there. If anybody here who's a marijuana user wants to go to either of those countries, I would warn them to look very carefully at the position before they behave there as they behave here, because they will get into serious trouble. Even the British Home Office, which actually is a propagandist for the drug abuse, even the British Home Office recognised in a report produced some years ago, we visited Japan, which operates a strong enforcement-led approach to drug misuse, often regarded as a zero-tolerance policy. Substances are more strictly controlled in many other countries. Some products, and then said, possession of even small amounts of drugs is punishable by lengthy imprisonment. Now, having acknowledged this, we didn't pay no attention to it at all, because the whole election and the aim of this shocking report was to say the opposite. So they said in remarks, which in my view are totally racist, that the behaviour of the Japanese people in government and the South Korean people in government by implication is purely some cultural difference between them and us. Well, you know what that usually means when people say it. It's quite shocking that the people in authority utterly ignore this very strong example of how proper enforcement of law can, in fact, fight against the peer pressure which pushes young people to take drugs and reduce the misery of drug taking in society. We used to do it, we could do it again tomorrow if we wanted to, but Mr. Blunt doesn't even want to know about it because he has other things in mind.
We will now move on to the second crossfire, and I'll give Mr. Hitchens the first question.
Yeah, it's very simple. Do you know anybody, Crispin, whose children have been devastated by these drugs?
Yes.
And what do you say to them? Would you say, actually, I want to see more of this going on? Is that how you explain it? How do you think that your policies, this is my question, how do you think that your policies can protect other people's children from undergoing the same thing that they're undergoing?
Because I think rather we parents associated with an organisation called Anyone's Child, who will have gone to a abuse festival, and they will have taken what they might thought was ecstasy, and then they will have discovered it wasn't ecstasy, in place of something else, and it killed them. Those parents are now mourning their child who was taking Kenaprise, taking a substance that was going to enable them to enjoy that concert or that music festival more than they otherwise would have done. And this is where the blanket prohibition is saying they're illegal because they're harmful. Everything is harmful in one way and then maybe end of you. So where are we going to draw the line? And if we create a policy where the stuff that is being supplied to people is gifted to the criminal supply chain, and then people who are then operating in circumstances which will be way past the highest possible standards to make sure the product they're producing is reliable and uncontaminated, MDMA, so I know you will then find that you will then create consequences and underneath the parents of those children who have died in those circumstances, and they want the policy to change for all the right reasons. And it will go as far as, I think the strongest example is the mother I met at the Conservative Body Conference last week, who was addressing a group on behalf of Transform, who were the organisation that modelled the regulations and the licence conditions as to how we would meet the challenge of legalising all these drugs by finding the right licence conditions to do so. She was the medical director of a big hospital in the West Midlands, and her son had a heroin addict, and he was told that his underlying mental condition, which was the cause of his heroin use, wouldn't be addressed by mental health services until he got himself healed. So, got himself healed, and became 6 months, and he got for 3 months, and as with most heroin addicts who were trying to get better, he fell off the wagon, and so he started again, and then eventually came to a period where he had got himself clean. He was 13 months in remission, and then he had another episode where he used the heroin. And then he knew that he wasn't going to be able to access the mental health service treatment he was going to address the original cause of his disorder. And that journey to such despair that he went off his own, that he was not going to be able to get access to the treatment that was going to fix the problem. And most people's drug use, particularly when it gets is about trying to make themselves feel better. Many people are medicated on illegal drugs in order to address some earlier trauma or depression in their life. And if we understand that, so we understand that all drugs are not the same, and their levels of harm are massively different depending on what drugs we're talking about, we might then have a chance of having a more intelligent policy based on the evidence around all the different drugs there are. We are not going to be able to change humanity's desire to make itself heal. It's been finding substances to make itself heal for thousands of years. And if you think we're going to prohibit it to have existence, there is no evidence to suggest you're going to succeed.
When did I share the person with his evidence?
It's everywhere.
I never said that. And the reason I say it is because that's not my intention or purpose of using the law in this sense to diminish its integrity. I find it shocking when they give people these terms such as Medicaid for these illegal drugs. Illegal drugs are not prescribed by qualified medical persons. They're not but if you want to interrupt me, I'll let you do so. I'll take the time. What would you prefer?
Let me return to one opportunities.
Good. Okay, so here's the point. I think it's fantastically responsible to use the term Medicaid to describe a person taking illegal drugs and unlimited quantities, which would not be described by a qualified medical person. I'm sure that you do it. But you ask for evidence, and I give you evidence. I give you evidence about patents, about the legal responsibility, you know, you got it, nor do you accept it. Nor do you accept the nature of the argument that there are countries which effectively reduce the use of drugs by using the law to do so. I also said to you earlier on that the point about your belief that the legalisation, or actually the legalisation of drugs will reduce the criminal involved in them and will make it possible to regulate can take bad MDMA. And I pointed out to you, only 25% of the marijuana sold in California is from legal sources, under basically what you propose. 25%, so 75% is not. How is what you propose to protect anybody from taking some poison at a rock festival? It isn't. And the idea that you, back at HMV, going to stand up to a Chancellor of the Exchequer who wants to raise taxes on drugs, obviously the new guys say, oh no, Chancellor, you can't do that, because I promised to be Hitchens at a debate in Oxford in 2022 that we will do it. Chancellors of the Exchequer aren't like that. And they want to raise tax. They raise tax for the reason why everywhere that drugs have been legalised, they have a tax. It's because treasuries, whether they be US state treasuries or the Canadian treasury, want more money. And they love sin taxes because they can tax heavily and people continue to pay them. So you lose that argument. And as you lose that argument, the percentage of people who carry on obtaining the drugs that you claim to be made safer from criminal gangs and completely unregulated will increase. What you say practically, in sound factually, in the life experience of what's actually happened by people who ask people to follow your advice, shows that the evidence which you claim to be in favour of is against what you propose. You pay no attention. I've said this to you before, we know that in other exchanges, all this I've said to you before, but you do not either rebut it, or refuse it, or accept it. You just carry on as if I haven't said it, and this is the experience I have with all the drug advisors. They never pay any attention because they have another purpose. They're not interested in things they claim to be interested in. They're interested in something else, and I think I've explained that to you as well.
So thank you very much. What I want to do is hand out pass around and take one each. This is about a class of drugs that we have put beyond medicine for 50 years because the effect of global prohibition was to end the research and development science of the psychedelic drugs. The leaf of that hanging around is about psilocybin. And psilocybin is the chemical content of man. And there was emerging evidence in the late 1960s that psilocybin, if taken in conjunction with appropriate psychotherapy and psychiatric oversight, would be able to treat mental health conditions such as depression, trauma, addiction, and all of that was swept away with global prohibition. And we are now finally getting to a place where arguments are now being listened about the opportunities that are available. There are 7,500 British veterans of national service recently come back from Iraq and Afghanistan who are suffering from PTSD. A third of those, 2,500, their PTSD is untreated with current psychiatric treatments. Most of those people would be able to treat their trauma if they had the treatment in conjunction with a compound like psilocybin or one of the other psychedelics, because the effect of policy has been to delay for 50 years the development of this science. And so when people say, coming up to your stuff about medicating, what we're doing now is soldiers are coming back from they can't medicate themselves easily. They can't get something prescribed by doctors. We managed to put it beyond conventional medicine for the time being. So what they do, they get onto the streets, they find someone who will give themselves illegally, and they medicate themselves. And what they're trying to do, they're trying to treat the condition that they've got. And if we can get to a place where we can begin to address the causes of depression, for example, that could make a significant impact on 6,500 people who take their own lives every year to depression. And it's about time we got serious with all the negative or forgotten positive opportunities that have gone by the wayside of the prohibition, as well as the terrible societal impacts of criminalisation across the board, without any regard for the evidence or facts. And that's where we're going to get to. It's a place where we have policy that is based on evidence.
Evidence, if I could ask, can you name the scientific paper which objectively tested, also finally shows that the brothers or grandmother actually has an effect.
Yes, but I don't have a comment. That's my
The other thing is the implication to carry this.
No, that's not true. That's not true. I'm not going to take it away. It's true.
It's true.
Yes.
Because at least the expects someone to ask that question.
No, because the evidence is there. I'm not a scientist. I agree with you. It's my correct. It's telling the text. It's my correct telling the text. As is yours on this business of the reporters to the newspapers that you write for, is because we take no negative evidence. And the scientific and research community look at politicians and think they are a bunch
Somebody intervenes longer. We're no longer at crossfire.
Okay, who's?
Yours.
Oh, great. Yeah, look, I think compared to Mr. Blunt, I have large contributes of references and information which backs up my case here. If anybody cares to challenge me, I've even brought 2 books, one of them written by me. Published 10 years ago, but still worth reading. It's called The War We Never Fought, and I published it's called The War We Never Fought. Because it was so either ignored or seriously even attacked by the reviewers, because the culture runs the wrong way. The culture was in favour of stupefying people with the line to become illegal, so that's the problem we all face. But a simple point that is implied in what Mr. Blunt has said about the laws preventing the search. There is in this country at the moment, in a part of Kent, in the name of the town, a very large marijuana farm. Maintaining out of an office license so that the search can take place until the supposed nobody's drug. But there has not been, from the government of this country, opposition to the search and to the claimed uses of drugs which are banned, and the reverse is the case. And it's quite wrong to suggest otherwise. So let's not have this again, it's this constant repetition of the claim of prohibition. There is no prohibition, we've established that. Let us argue about what is actually taking place. And what is actually taking place is something very different. And why is it that anybody actively seeks to go beyond this? Because the only step beyond this, and large campaigns, very well financed, are working in the United Nations as we speak, is to get rid of the international treaty, which obliges all countries which are members of the United Nations to maintain the laws against drugs which they have. And that is the next challenge. Now, why do we want to get rid of that treaty? Because we want to make a lot of money. It's the only reason. That is why people are spending money to get rid of it, because they want to make a lot of money. Absolutely bluntly, I imagine he's moved by nothing with human compassion and heart. And I make no direct accusation against him. His actions and arguments serve the cause of people who want to make money, masses and masses of money out of people suffering. And if you don't believe that people want to make money out of people suffering, just go out here and look around you. You can just go out here and look around you at a number of huge corporations, international corporations, which make money out of human suffering, out of obesity, out of horribly adulterated food, out of tobacco, which is still illegal and still sells. And there's so many other things that you will certainly should do. This will come if you do not oppose it. It's too late for me, I should be dead before this comes to any serious point. Your generation has the power to choose as to whether to take this step into a third world casino culture where money is everything. In fact, there's no other value in money. But if you value anything other than money, then you must see that the desire to make money out of human suffering is one that civilized persons have to oppose with all their heart and soul, all their lives, and every opportunity they take. And that's why I come here tonight. In many ways prefer to be doing other things, but precisely I wrote the book to be abused. I knew I'd been abused. I appeared on television programs with Mr. Blunt and others to be abused and misrepresented, because to me this is a fantastically important cause, and I desire to make sure that nobody, whoever encounters me or my arguments, can go away not knowing that this is a huge moral question and you have to take one side or the other. Do you believe
that people should make money out of people suffering, or do you not? And if you don't, then you must oppose these measures towards the liberalisation of the drug trade.
It's time to move on to the moderated portion of the debate. There are many places we could start, but let's start with the potential therapeutic efficacy of certain substances. So the wording of the motion is about drug policy, one of the latest scientific evidence. I'm going to do Mr. Blunt here a favor and put on my hat as a scientist for a moment and say that there is indeed a study on the effectiveness of psychedelics for treatment-resistant
I made certain allegations about the study. I didn't say a study.
Yes.
There are several.
They falsified it. They falsified it. An objective study.
There are many people who look at
Robert
character is stated, and they even have a BBC documentary.
We'll leave time for questions there. But there's a study from Johns Hopkins, Alan Davis, and colleagues, 2020, which you look at, which says that psilocybin is 4 times more effective than existing antidepressants at treating treatment-resistant depression. So, Mr. Hitchens, what do you that would be
4 times 0 is 0.
Yeah, so 4 times 0.
4 times 0 is 0. So I don't know if I don't know how
on that note,
our objective evidence does not inform the diagnosis of the mind of American subjects, so we should plus nobody pretends to the so let's the useful set that.
and you also believe that all drugs are equally dangerous. Let's move on to race, which I'm surprised as an issue that we haven't actually discussed yet in this debate. I'd like to pull a quote from John Ehrlichman, who was an aide to the Nixon administration. He said, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it legal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. So, Mr. Blunt, do you think that the war on drugs is primarily a racial-related issue?
I'm afraid the evidence is that the motivations around the people who drove the drugs in the 1961, not on the basis of evidence about the harms of the drugs, but about the use. And in the 1950s, in America, it was African Americans who were the principal users of cannabis. And therefore the sentencing around cannabis was as heavy, if not heavy, than it was for drugs that were significantly more dangerous. Why? Because of people who use it. The whole basis of our approach was not informed by evidence. It was informed by straightforward racial prejudice. It is a shocking place to find ourselves 50 years later that the world's drugs and the agreements between nations are based more on prejudice than any kind of evidence or science. And that then goes the social effect can be precisely what you described, the astonishing number of African Americans who are in prison. I went to the United States White House prisons, and I think there are something like 25% of adult black Americans have either been in custody or were under active probation supervision. It is an appalling, and at any one time it was 1 in 11 population. And we wonder then why communities then feel excluded from mainstream society. Why we then have communities who are particularly associated with this business, which has huge cash returns. We've driven the margins of our society into this business, and we need to find a way to invest them and to bring them into the mainstream of our society. And it's not really hard. We're set up now. it needs to change.
So, Mr. Hitchens, how do you reconcile your support for tightening drug laws with the fact that those measures are likely going to disproportionately impact people of color?
Well, I don't support tightening the drug laws, I support enforcement of the laws which we passed by Parliament in 1971, and enforced I'm not sure what evidence Mr. Blunt has for the supposedly measure of drug prosecutions in this country. The United States, as we know, particularly in the southern states, is a social disaster, which is still not recovered from catastrophe of slavery. It's not a country in which I campaign or in part of politics, and I think it has very much bearing on this one. If he wants to argue that there is great discrimination in prosecution here, well, it would better use figures, and if he finds that non-white people are disproportionately prosecuted, my response is prosecute more white people. I don't think it's anything to do with the question of whether we should make an effort to prevent certain drugs. And it's one of those arguments which people can pass divert attention from the real point. Say, if that is so, then correct it and prosecute more white people and make it better. If it's not so, then it's not the point. I don't think it was an issue. But if you want to do the issue, then sure, and I'm happy to make it as undiscriminated as you can. But the main discrimination I was between those who break criminal law and those who do not. Those who break criminal law should be first of all warned, and then on second place punished. And then they'll start doing, in most cases, being punished. A lot of people will do too on basic principles of deterrent justice, which are very effectively applied, as established, I say again, in South Korea and Japan.
Is this amphetamine use in Japan?
Sorry?
Is there any amphetamine use in Japan?
Well, it was a post-war phenomenon, and it is very serious post-war phenomenon. It was the reason why the Japanese state introduced its drug control laws, and they have to some extent reduced as a result. Those laws then became used to prosecute marijuana use. What I was explaining, which is a serious and dangerous thing, and that is the right time to solve the mission to do something about it.
Then what do they
Needs to explain. Well, what do you mean it didn't work?
That's all we use, right?
It's still being used less than it would be if it wasn't prosecuted. Once again, there are wild utopias where if you make something illegal, everybody will stop doing it. Anyone who faced experience of life knows perfectly well that there will always be some people who will break laws. But you're not going about that. What you can do is change the nature of the problem in society by making it clear that you're against it. It's one of the big differences between this country as it is now and as it is now. It's a strong socialist political drug taking which is strong, which tends to go together with the serious prosecution of criminal act. It's vanished, but it hasn't vanished now. It hasn't vanished in South Korea either. And as I say, less people to go there and act as they do here. Quite surprised, not just by the law, but by the attitudes they have. I think those attitudes are more sensible than others do now.
So, Mr. Blunt, I'd like to get some clarity on this. So, what do you have to say to Mr. Hitchens' evidence that South Korea and Japan's very restrictive measures on drug enforcement have led to a decrease in drug use in those countries? Do you refute that evidence? Do you have evidence to the contrary?
All I know is that both Japan in particular has a significant problem with amphetamine use. It's got it has a different pattern of drug use. And the evidence globally, in general, is that however severe you make your enforcement measures, you are never going to stop being inflated.
Let's scroll down and
No, what we do by effective prohibition is we place drug users on the side of organised crime. They become their allies, they become their marketing partner. They're the salesforce. And that's why, since prohibition, drug use in the United Kingdom has massively increased.
Sorry, you assert that is why. You assert that in a country which is more or less abandoned enforcement of its drug laws, the reason why people have become drug users is disobeying prosecuted. This seems to me to lack of logic and fact. Let's repeat for you something, but I don't know to some extent. We visited Japan, which operates strong enforcement-led approach to drug misuse. Substances are more strictly controlled than in many other countries. And on page 51 of that report, it admits that tough enforcement is accompanied by lower use. In Japan, the drug use is subject to a degree of stigma. In this context, it's difficult to tell whether those levels of drug use which it concedes the case are a consequence of legislation or apply to the same cultural attitudes which British claims they concede two things, that the law is enforced and the people obey. Using the thing that you enforce the law, people will need to disobey. It's just a case of your life. If something that you wish to do is illegal, it's a serious crime across the development, you can't do it. So it's one remark, it's a question to you.
I want to raise that question, but
Why not? It's perfectly, but you're arguing that millions of other people are confronted with the law of same side. You didn't break it.
no, I'm not.
You yourself asked whether you were going to do this answer. Why do you think other people were there?
Because they do. And the evidence is that they have. And I gave the example in my opening remarks about how we managed to massively increase the number of people addicted to heroin as a product of prevention. When in the 1960s we had what was called the British system. And when we tried to reinstate the British system where if you had a heroin problem, you could go to the doctor and get a prescription. And if you get a prescription for heroin, it means you know where your heroin is coming from and it's clean. And you're under control because the state is keeping you. And you can hold down a job, you can keep your family, you can keep your house. Lose that prescription, and then you're going to find the heroin. And then you can't even be sure it's actually heroin. And look at the people who then got into that cycle and have been shooting them ever since. And horrifying the world and they kill themselves. Often by accident. And they don't know, they destroy their homes and they will go shooting into their arms.
So, Mr. Hitchens, I want to ask you about this quote you read. It said that tougher enforcement results in less drug use. What do you say to the evidence that comes from Portugal, which has decriminalized all substances since 2000?
Oh,
Over discussed on the street.
What Portugal did in its famous miracle policy was to formalise what it had been doing for many years. It didn't suddenly abandon the policy of strict enforcement of law. Do you know how many people were in prison in Portugal before for drug offences, before the Great Revelation decriminalisation? No, 21 in the whole country. 21? Anybody in Portugal will tell you that this amazing achievement was actually simply a formalisation or a total relaxation of the law. It's not been enforced in years. And that it isn't, the claims made to the script are, how shall I say, skimpy, even on their own terms, and lifetime use of
What happened to death?
such as mine. Well, what did happen to death? I mean, if you look at let me find the correct portion of this work that I did so the other answer the question the thing about deaths is that they're only one measure, and I don't myself argue that the danger of drugs, particularly marijuana, is not death. There are very few cases, even though the first day of the 1960s for us, there are very few cases. No, actually, David Nuttall, I thought you would respect. I listened to the lecture at King's College London a couple of years ago, in which he said that there are some cases of deaths from marijuana with 12 months. If you don't disagree with him, that's fine. Don't disagree with him, not with me. Don't tell me that not true. But it's not the point. The point about marijuana particularly is that there's a medical illness problem. And that very frequently it uses its victims of life for many, many years, but it depends on really happy or productive or probably sexual lives. It's a desperate thing now. And to conceal the fact that nobody It's just not a legitimate argument. It's not about death. And what about Portugal?
Because the reason they brought their laws were so many of their kids would die because of the use of opiates in Portugal in the late 1990s, by the late 1990s. They had a drug desperation that was very near as bad as ours today.
Excuse me.
And the effect of decriminalisation.
When you say the Great Portuguese... Okay, so in 1993, Portugal was supposed to remove this coalition. So in 1993 it began in the exchange of heroines. It began to treat so-called addicts in 1987. And this began to substitute prescribed drugs for heroin in 1977. You're completely ignorant of the real situation. Portugal, before this extraordinary revolutionary change which you supposedly imagine took place. A lot of things happened afterwards, including an increase in the number of... I'm not claiming this is connected with the change, but you might be right. The number of crimes of theft increased after the change, for instance. So I don't say that's a cause of the change. But let's say the point at which the law changed, the number of people in Portuguese prisons for single drug possession was 21. Not 21%. 21 people out of 10 million people in Portugal. This is not a country running a severe revolutionary policy. The whole policy, the idea that drugs should be treated with legalization is now proposed by substantial figures in Portugal, including the mayor of Porto, the second largest city, who said that drug decriminalisation is not possible. And such policy is set to be drug trafficking. I've worked on an enormous bit of protesting, which you can try and Google electronically to put it down. You use the drug trafficker search, you can install the Portuguese drug trafficker. It was all the big economists, and it explains just how much of also that Portugal is good.
So, Mr. Hitchens, I want to return to this point about death because I think it's actually a very important issue. To say that it doesn't matter, I think, is completely false.
I didn't say it didn't matter, so it wouldn't be false. It would be understanding if you said that it didn't matter. I didn't say it didn't matter. I said that death is not the point that I'm arguing about. I'm arguing in the case of marijuana.
But do you have any evidence to the contrary that decriminalization reduces the amount of overdose doses? For example, in Portugal, the number of overdose doses per 1 million is only 3 in 2015. But in the UK, it's 84 per 1 million this year.
Okay, so you should be proposing this. You're not thinking of a severe policy of established prohibition. What do you think happens to people who are caught in possession?
Well, the thing is
what do you think happens to people who are caught in possession of heroin in this country?
Well, I mean,
what do you think happens to them?
if they're black,
No, nothing happens to them. Peter Doherty, the alleged singer, was in an actual court, turning up at least sentenced for previous drug testing. When wraps of heroin fell out of his coat pocket in the court building. What happened to him? He went home that night. There is, and this idea that we're surrounded by policemen hovering over people who are trying to pick up and send them to prison with balls and chains for years who are in possession of heroin is such tripe. It simply is not true. The statistics do not support it. In Scotland, where it costs total and horrific amounts of people who die following long-term heroin abuse, is the law against heroin possession seriously pursued? When was somebody last sentenced to prison for it? Tell me. Because it isn't, you know it isn't. The law is not seriously enforced in this country. Probably this country has a laxer drug enforcement, even than Portugal. Because the set aside contrary examples of different policies is just so unable to stop doing it.
So, that the operational policy of the police is based on the understanding that they cannot arrest their way out of the drug crisis. And therefore, what they're trying to do now is to divert users into treatment. And the leading thinkers, who like Mike Barton and others who led operational policing in this area, know that they cannot address the problem by arresting users in the way that we use drugs. they try to get users into treatment.
How do they do this, Crispin? You're saying they know this. I'm saying they think it. I disagree with you. How do the police inspected one of the most ineffective and useless organisations ever contrived by the human mind? The traffic that were ordered up by aliens tonight, how long would it take for us to discover they weren't there? I don't know why you say they know this. Because in other countries, in other countries where police do actually receive the prosecution for setting drugs, it doesn't happen. But you, I say this again, I maybe even by endless torture and repetition, I can get you to listen to what I'm saying. Actually, yes, it is established that if you prosecute the possession of drugs, you reduce drug abuse.
So, Mr. Hitchens, this will be the final question before we move on to questions from the audience. If the police are as ineffectual as you make them out to be, then why is it that increasing police enforcement is going to actually fix the problem?
Well, you answered your own question. My proposal is to create a new police force, and which is partly enforcing the law, which is the job, and once we've done that, to sack the position where we're placed. Once we've done that, we will have a serious enforcement of the law. But until we do, the current police, which is basically assembly of the current legislation, will not enforce the law because they don't believe in it. They don't believe in law enforcement. And even if they did, where are they? You go on the street here in Washington and see how they'll actually find one. It's fine, countless so much more people than the police have.
Okay, we'll now move on to questions from the audience.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, what's your opinion on alcohol usage? Like, do you think it should be illegal, like you propose with drugs?
It's not possible to make it illegal.
It's not possible to make your fantasy police force.
Any of you don't. The Islamic Party of Iran has literally established policy of alcohol prohibition. It's completely and utterly ineffective. Alcohol has been legal in that country and in nations for thousands of years. You can't do it. I wish you could. You can't. What I actually thought was very effective were the 1915 licensing laws introduced in this country at the beginning of the First World War, under which I grew up, which greatly suppressed an enormous amount of governments and made alcohol use to be hard to get, and which were disbanded by Mr. Grant's party when they were in office. What is certainly the case is that alcohol is a disastrous drug, connected with criminal violence, with domestic abuse, with all kinds of other disease and misery. And the ideal society is being introduced among us now, as marijuana is, and in any sense of person knowing what they know about it, would prohibit it to make sure that it was not sold or possessed, and would prevent it from being known by our society. It's too late to do that. So let us not use the existence of one disastrous poison in endemic in our society. Let us not, this is my derivation, let us not let the existence of one disastrous poison in our society become the excuse for the existence of another, because apart from anything else, that's offensive and exploitive.
That was the first phase of my question. I was going to continue. No, that was just the first part. No, what I'm saying is that you then just admitted that licensing and regulation reduced usage and reduced harm of alcohol.
You say report.
Yeah.
You could not in my teens and early 20s, you could not open a plant between the hours of 2 in the afternoon. And if you did, you would be prosecuted.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, why can't you apply those same principles of licensing and regulation to drugs now? Because people, you might say marijuana is just being introduced now, but like it or not, it's at a level of cultural saturation where people are going to be using it regardless of whether or not the policing is enforced. So if people are going to inevitably be using this drug, which they will be, and you admit it yourself that people, even if there's a law in place, they will still break it. If people are going to inevitably be using this drug, surely we should be focusing on harm reduction, education, and making people aware of the benefits of the drugs and also the drawbacks of responsible usage, and therefore harm can be curtailed as much as possible.
You're making a series of unsupported statements about two grounds. The first one is its use is widespread. A lot of people have used it once or twice, but the number of, and this is what increases when you legalise, the number of regular individuals is still quite low. And non-medical medicine, and one of the reasons why this is it's not legal, it's not advertised, it's not, you can't buy it in shops. Once that happens, then the number of regular users will now go out into the So that's one of the things. The other thing is that we're saying you should treat something which is endemic in society and already exists, and is indeed a hugely legal business, in the same way as you should treat a dangerous drug which is not endemic in society, and which is currently used by criminal gangs. I don't think that's sensible. The two problems are quite different from shared inside. But while we still have time, we can still prevent the introduction of these drugs and not accept the results of the alcohol on the same scale. Once you have marijuana use or use of the other drugs on the scale of alcohol use, then frankly, it's over. The third world is too civilized compared to what would be like that. So we have to take some steps to prevent it. It's quite different
But the logic of that position is that you should prohibit alcohol and you should enforce the law. And then you get the consequences of the right.
They didn't enforce the law.
Thanks for the debate. So I was wondering if, because definitely you asked about whether we want the society to suffer. I guess nobody wants that, right? It's about alleviating suffering. And then the question is, how do we get to do that? So shouldn't this be a question of evaluating costs versus benefits of specific compounds? So, and maybe it's a question for both of you. Like, should we kind of legalize all the drugs? So, maybe you mentioned at the beginning which drugs you actually meant, but there's like a huge difference between psychedelics and, let's say, opioids. So, and there is a lot of evidence for psychedelics, for example, like the NUT, where Robin Garrett-Harris groups followed by there in Zurich, Compass now with like treatment-resistant depressed patients that after a single dose, even 6 months later, they're in remission, which is absolutely amazing. But then that's one class, but then for opiates, after very few uses, you can get addicted. So it's a really high addiction potential. So I guess the question is, should we legalize all of them, or should we kind of evaluate the costs, benefits, and if these things should change as we find out more in research?
The logical position is to regulate and license and regulate relative to the potential harm of the drug. It will have some, and the tax law, again, will be a decision based on whether or not we want to make damn sure that the use supply chain is put out of business. And for every single different drug, there are likely to be you're going to need to actually have license conditions and regulations that are relevant to that drug. There is no blanket answer on this. There may be transformative use of the fentanyl, the so concentrated and so dangerous that it should remain illegal. And the lesson here is that I think is actually about individual responsibility. How do you take your point? They won't make individual decisions if they both for themselves. Because they have a reason, probably something of what they were doing and the risks they were running. And the risks were, for everyone who made that decision here, would almost certainly outweigh by the benefits that they would get out of the fees the drugs they were given, the high they given for the time, and they probably all made some kind of risk analysis about your choice you make. And the more information you have which to make those decisions, the better decisions people will make. And I think that's the position you want to get to. And the state is then using license conditions and regulations that are at one with the experience of society as a whole. Those regulations and license conditions will be respected.
Thank you. How about your position? Do you think then that if we acquire enough scientific evidence that, let's say, psilocybin helps with depression and other conditions, you would still kind of keep it?
Well, as long as the scientific evidence informs the Karl Popper's rules, then that's fine. That means objective, falsifiable, experimental evidence rather than some vague paper which doesn't convey those things. And we are, I'm afraid, in so much these areas, most of arguments which don't interrupt that. My main argument has to be against the legalisation of marijuana, because this is the line which once crossed the irreversible. It's far more important than the sensible line of views, and also it's the great cultural symbol of the 60s revolution, the Holy Communion of the 60s revolution, which John and all the rest of it. It's a belief of most of my generation, in fact, something I had to escape myself, but it is very strong belief. It's also very heavily marketed, and it makes a lot of money, and it's had brilliant public relations. I think most people in this room last would say that marijuana was a soft drug. I say something that can make you mentally ill the rest of your life is not soft. A soft drink has no alcohol. Even soft cold is preferable to a soft drug, which actually can make you mentally ill for the rest of your life. So I really restrict my efforts, because if I lose this battle, the country loses this battle, the world loses this battle, then we have it, as far as civilization is concerned. I restrict my efforts to trying to prevent the rush to legalize marijuana, because once that's done, the rest will just follow. How you can possibly pacify this thing objectively on one level, I don't know. Heroin has its great dangers. Cocaine has its great dangers. Psychedelics have great dangers. And marijuana has its great dangers. And MDMA has great dangers. They're all different. I don't know what possible instrument we can use objectively to decide which is worse. In general, I think people should be dissuaded from taking them, because I think that the world itself is beautiful enough without it. I also think that if you dislike the world as it is, and this perhaps comes from my student years from social strategy, holds good anyway. If you dislike the world as it is, don't stupefy yourself into being unable to see it. Take action to make it better while you still have time. Because you have time, which I do not have. And if you really think the world is so foul that you actually want to follow the mind with chemicals, then think again. If the world is that foul, do something that may be better. I think it's a shocking retreat from moral agency and indeed from humanity to hide in the world of superstition when we could be doing some good.
Well, maybe certain compounds help with that, but...
Think about what?
Maybe certain compounds actually help with
I can't do it properly. What's on the audience?
We're running quite over time, so we have time for 2 more questions and the last speaker speak their responses. Mark.
Hi, I think it's probably okay with that microphone. So, I mean, I think with regards to Mr. Hitchens, I would just encourage him to perhaps publish some of his observations in, say, something like the New England Journal of Medicine with regards to the psychedelic research. But my main question...
I don't have any observations, that's a learned comment. I'm asking people to look at other people's observations of the scientific method. So please, stick to serious debate, honestly.
Anyways, my main question, which is hopefully a brief one, is for Mr. Blunt. So, how would you respond to your fellow party member, the government member, Sulaiman Raymond, who's recently suggested that actually heroin should be brought up to Class A together with, say, heroin, in contrast to what you've been saying tonight?
Well, I'm delighted to say that the Home Secretary consented. And she was on the record there's no report of the market the Home Secretary saying that the campus should go Class A, and the government put on the record there are no plans to change the Class A.
Yes, in the middle.
This is a question for Mr. Hitchens, sort of, I guess probably not use that. By way of analogy, cheating on one's spouse is obviously very harmful to the individual, the family, and the community, and yet we don't arrest people for having a mistress.
So, I didn't get what you began.
Cheating on one's spouse is very harmful to the individual, the children, the family, and the community, and yet we don't arrest people for having a mistress. How do you square the individual liberty to make bad choices of democracy with the criminalization of individual use of drugs?
Well, they're different. One is a question of the moral law, and one question of the criminal law. One is an action, which, according to the law of this country, is a breach of criminal law, which is to say, in case of possessing marijuana, even at Class P, entails a maximum prison sentence of 5 years and an unlimited fine. And that is what this country decides to do. It's wisdom, in my view, I think the moral law is criminal law. It's wisdom to decide the law here, and not to attempt to police adultery, no criminal law. And it's a reasonable decision in one fair share. I think it will take much imagination to work out why it's to be behind criminal law. And if you break it, you might think you should first of all be warned in the first offence, and then be warned seriously told not to do it again. If you do it again, you should be punished. And if that happens to you, then you won't do it again. And lots of other people seeing what's happened to you won't do it either. And tens of thousands of children in other ways where their lives will not have a life in them, which is the purpose of protecting criminal justice, which I really think of.
It's super attractive to withdraw into your power. And I suppose one can, as far as your making. And it's actually a very about a moral decision. And then your responsibility to other people who can harm around the environment by actions, words, injecting all the teeth with all the tenant risks that they need. I think it's really better that we invite people to take responsibility for their actions, and also to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. If, for many of these things, the drugs we were talking about, hidden cameras for most people, certainly for people who are also in their brains and feel the risks are very low, and the penalties will probably be then in touch stuff like California and Washington State a few years ago around the subject. Why do people do drugs? It makes them feel better. And it makes them feel better than harming other people. Why do we stop?
Because it does not.
Great. So now move on to closing statements from each side. As I said, we're running twice a week over time, so keep it 3 minutes for closing statements. Start at the east wall.
I respect Gareth who reminded me of addressing Oxford Psychological Society, and in the name of society, it's quite nice to be a friendly supporting audience. So your questions have tended to reinforce it. And I just want us to go back from the moral extremes, because prohibition is an extreme policy response to a problem. And as an extreme policy response, it's then made the management of the harms of drugs do to our society, or do to individuals, much more complicated, because they then can't engage with society itself by and large to get help. And a parallel I would use here, there is a study was done in Victoria, in central London, of 100% association between homelessness and addiction. And those who were addicted to alcohol, you could do something about it, because they didn't engage in coordinated and then train that, and then engage in quite serious criminal activity. So they then got hurled out on the streets, because it was prohibited. Alcohol is a drug. It's quite a dangerous drug. Yet within the law, you could then provide help to those people in their circumstances. And are we going to try and have the status in place where it's going to work with the grain of society and the choices that we make, and against those who want to undermine our society and operate outside it with the criminal supply chain? And we actually want to draw away people who we have pushed into the criminality actually back into society so that they are then feel that their society is for them. And the consequence of our force approach is to take marginalised communities, particularly the Afro-Caribbean community of London, for example, and for men in that community to feel that the business they were succeeding is a drug business. And that's largely why in London you can get cocaine if you know in London where you can get it. The criminal supply chain is highly rigid. The legal supply chain is a highly rigid because unregulated arrest, you don't buy what you want in a shop. There is a middle way, actually, of the state doing its best to take control of this and to work with the grey of humanity and the choices that people might want to do or won't want to do, depending on their circumstances. But let's work with people and not against people and put people outside and against their own society. It's a huge gap in the world.
Moments ago, before he began his declaration, Crispin said that people would take responsibility for their actions. He then moved on to his speech and announced that we should take responsibility for their actions, that if they were about to take it was our fault. Not their fault. They had no agency. They had no agency in getting about this fault. We pushed them by some means or other into taking drugs. Well, if you believe that, then that's what you believe. I don't have to believe myself. People take drugs for pleasure, and that is fundamentally why they take them. They make a choice whether to take them or not. Many people in this country are ill, some are ill with horrible diseases, such as cancer. And if they could stop having cancer, they could give up having cancer, everyone should they would. So to compare this behaviour with an involuntary illness seems to me to be a major insult to those people. I have been interrupted. He said, listen to they would love to give up having cancer, but they can't. So to equate the behaviour of drug users with ill and treatment seems to be a major insult to those who are genuinely ill. It's one of the worst parts of the other. The fundamental problem with Mr. Blunt's position about this in general is they announce all kinds of ills in our society. The enormous amounts of drug taking, the horrors which result from it. And they blame them on the prohibition which doesn't exist. And I think I've sought to explain why they did this evening. They don't blame them on the prohibition which doesn't exist because what they want to do is to attack the remainder of the law, which prevents, as I said, the mass sale, manufacture and distribution of these drugs legally by large corporations. That is the last barrier which remains. Drugs in society are freely taken by people who are not, for the most part, punished or prosecuted for in any way trouble by the authorities for taking or possessing the drugs at all. That's not the issue. The issue is that what we still have is a law preventing those drugs from being sold legally. Once that law is gone, our society will be transformed. Hugely. As I say, I don't know if it's not understand what he's doing or it seems to me it must be reasonably obvious to believe that that is what remains of the drug laws in this country. So I'm going to comment on him. I was going to say to you when you decide what you think about this. Bear in mind that is the issue. The constant repetition of the myth of this prohibition in this country is demonstrably, falsifiably, objectively, falsifiably untrue. It is untrue. Nothing that they say about prohibition is true. The police do not prosecute. The courts don't prosecute. The prisons don't punish. The courts don't punish. Nothing happens to people who use drugs. It just doesn't. So there are consequences we face. And not because we're not as much of a paradise as we should be. We're even more of a paradise if we're Portugal from the point of view of regulation and legislation. It's because we've given up trying. And yet there exists in the world examples of countries which is not good. And if we ignore those countries and continue to pretend that they exist, and others that they exist, and if we put forward language which is based on palpable, demonstrable untruth about prohibition, persecution, and criminalization, then we will do great damage to our society, and to our minds, and to our morals, and to our understanding. And it's perfectly all right for people who know nothing and have no chance of education and do a little form, I suppose, like this. You might expect it, but I find often in those places where people have never had a chance of education, they get more sense from the subject than I get here. But it is absolutely shameful for people who have been especially educated over many, many years to accept these feeble, weak, baseless, factual, logical, faulty arguments as if they were true. I would very much urge you, as you take away any falseness, not to do that. Mr. Blunt is utterly, dangerously, tragically wrong.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming to a very good debate. As I mentioned, we are selling our merch afterwards. Please do support the society if you want to continue seeing us like this. And see you soon.